Well, good evening. I'm GLEAVES Whitney. I'm director of the Hauenstein Center for Presidential Studies here at Grand Valley, and I welcome you and thank you for joining us. If you've watched Saturday Night Live, and if you watched it last Saturday night, you saw Fred Armisen do a skit on his famous giant megapixel touch map. And what was striking about this most recent skit was the way he singled out Michigan and poked a little fun at us. If you saw Michigan sort of bouncing off the margins. Now, we can all chuckle at an SNL skit. In fact, we probably should seek a little levity at this time because laughter, as we know, is the best medicine. But there is little that is funny about the context of this year's presidential election. What with two wars, energy worries, the severe erosion of confidence, whether on Pennsylvania Avenue or Wall Street, the angriest electorate ever polled, and the worst global economic crisis in 8 decades. Here in Michigan, we have special cause for concern since our unemployment rate is almost 9%, and we already know all too well what a recession feels like. I'm reminded of what a presidential candidate said in a contest 28 years ago, quote, "A recession is when your neighbor loses his job, a depression is when you lose your job, and recovery is when the guy in the White House loses his job." Now, with 8 days of campaigning left, what can Michigan's impact on election 08 be? Likewise, what will the election's impact be on Michigan, on our economy, our environment, and our energy costs and sources and inventions? On this stage is assembled the brain power to look into these questions. The panelists will be introduced shortly. My pleasant duty is to note that tonight's town hall has been made possible by a partnership between Michigan Radio and the Hauenstein Center for Presidential Studies. This is our first official partnership, very proud of it, and I want to thank Jack Lessenberry, Zoe Clark, who couldn't be with us tonight, but who did a lot of the work for this, Tamar Charney, and so many of the folks at Michigan Radio, and also our 5 distinguished panelists for making this town hall possible. Thank you very much. Well, it is now my pleasure to direct your attention to Dustin DWYER, whose voice is probably well known to many of you in this room. Dustin's public radio career goes back to 2004 when he was an intern for NPR's Talk of the Nation. Well, he and Jack Lessenberry have worked closely together at Michigan Radio since 2005, and his reports on Michigan's economy and the auto industry have been heard on NPR nationally. Dustin is Michigan Radio's newly appointed West Michigan reporter, so congratulations, Dustin. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dustin.
Hello. I want to be brief. They did ask me to mention a couple of things. From Michigan Radio standpoint, this week we're running a series of stories about the election, about the ballot issues, about some congressional races, and about the presidential election. So try and tune into those. They're also going to be available on the website. And 2 is just to introduce Jack, who I've worked with for a while. My first full-time job at Michigan Radio is with Jack. He's been a political reporter for 30 years, and he knows more about politics than anyone I know. And to this day, if I have any questions about politics, I go to Jack. So, Jack, our moderator.
I accept the nomination. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming, and welcome to our panel, which is formally called Election 2008's Impact on Michigan, Environment, Energy, and the Economy. If you're watching this by web streaming, we're in the Loosemore Auditorium at the DeVos Center tonight. This is an absolutely wonderful facility, and we're grateful to everybody, including Grand Valley State University, for making it available to us. You know, everybody always complains that campaigns today are too much about personalities and who's ahead in the polls, and not enough about the issues that really matter to us. It's just a game of gotcha. Well, tonight we're going to try to remedy that a little bit. We're going to look at the issues as they involve the 3 major areas I mentioned, and especially as they pertain to Michigan. We're going to try and establish where things stand now and hold the surrogates' feet to the fire to establish where the two major party candidates stand on issues involving, again, the economy, energy, and the environment. To help us do that, with us tonight are three wonderful policy experts in these areas and two high-ranking surrogates for each of these campaigns in Michigan. First of all, the experts. Joining us to help understand the economy is Dr. Paul ISELY, who's an associate professor of economics at Grand Valley and an expert especially on innovation and new technology. Unfortunately, you don't give stock market tips, do you? No?
Not at all.
Not at all. So our resource person on the environment is Mark Coscarelli, who I've known of for a long time and had the pleasure of meeting for the first time tonight. He's Vice President for Great Lakes in the environmental areas at Public Sector Consultants and is also manager of the Great Lakes Fishery Trust. He will give us fishing tips later. He also has a long environmental resume that includes a stint as senior environmental specialist in the Michigan DEQ, the State Department of Environmental Quality. And our point person on energy issues is Ahmad Mahawili, who is the executive director of the Michigan Alternative and Renewable Energy Center at Grand Valley State, and he wears a number of other hats besides. Thank you all for your lending your expertise tonight. I'd now also like to introduce our two surrogates representing the campaign, going in alphabetical order by the last name of their candidate. First, representing the Republican Party, Senator, I just want to shake him up, you know. Senator John McCain, his former congressman and State Senator Joe Schwartz, who's also a physician who still practices in Battle Creek. Dr. Schwartz knows Senator McCain very well. He managed a successful primary campaign in the state here in the year 2000. If you remember, McCain was seen as much of a long shot in that primary as he is now, or maybe more so in this election. And Dr. Schwartz and John McCain have frequently campaigned for and with each other ever since. Also representing the Democrats and Senator Barack Obama tonight is Mark Brewer. Mark's been the chair of the Michigan Democratic Party since 1995. He's now the longest-serving Democratic Party chair in the nation. He's a graduate of both Harvard University and also has a law degree from Stanford. We have a panel of underachievers here, ladies and gentlemen. Now, here's how this event's going to work. I'm going to start by asking some questions of both the panelists and the surrogates. Each panelist will get no more than 2 minutes to respond to each question. Normally, we'll seek to get input from both parties. If a question is asked of one specific surrogate, the other will get a maximum of 1 minute to respond if they or I feel it necessary. And then after I put everyone through the ringer a few times, a nice, polite public radio way, of course, it'll be your turn to ask questions. I'll let you know when that happens. If you have a question, what I'd like you to do is come up and stand in line at one of the two microphones or fill out one of the index cards that you've been given. And if you don't want to ask it yourself, I'll be happy to ask it for you. So, to start off with, Dr. Isely, it now seems inevitable that Chrysler will no longer exist after a few months. The best case scenario, according to automotive economists, will be a scenario in which something like 30,000 jobs are eliminated, most of them in Michigan. How is Michigan going to cope with that?
Gave me an easy one to start with.
Yeah.
Well, I think 30,000 is going to be light. I think it's going to be more than that.
Because of the ripple effect?
Because of the ripple effect and even directly. So I would see a larger job loss than that. And it's going to be a big hit on an already weak eastern side of the state. At this point, I don't see easy ways to overcome the issue without a lot of retraining of workers, and that's going to take a long time. So I don't see an upside in the next 2 or 3 years to Michigan of that combination, except for the fact that maybe GM will survive.
Now, you mentioned the eastern part of the state. Will this have effects on the western side of the state as well?
Well, to a lesser extent. We aren't as exposed to the automotive industry on this side of the state, and actually up through September, before the financial crisis started, Kent County was the Grand Rapids MSA was the only city in Michigan losing jobs slower than the rest of the United States. So we're in a much better position on this side.